A bullet smashed into a boulder, ricocheted off, and burned Dakota Harlan's cheek. He threw himself backward, landed hard, flipped over, and was crawling on his elbows, shoving forward on his belly as another shot fired, then fired again. He moved without thinking. A Winchester 73. Dakota recognized the rifle's loud peal because he had one of his own. He gripped his Winchester now, always keeping it close to hand, and he'd been relentless about that since the day he survived an earlier attack. Judging by where the shooter was located, and Dakota knew his land well, he crawled farther, keeping himself low. He slithered, more like, not wanting to give the shooter anything to aim at. At last, he reached a row of sheltering stones, each of them half the height of a man. These boulders hadn't found their way here by accident. He'd ringed the edge of the pasture with them. It was months of brutally hard work in the hot sun. In fact, 2 years of Dakota's life had been spent getting the boulders dragged around into this shelter. He had many such shelters all through his valley. He'd analyzed the entrances to this meadow, the lookouts where a sneaking gunman might set up, the likely places, and a couple less likely, where a man was likely to open up on him from cover. He'd hoped to never need them, but right now, he was grateful for every hard hour he'd spent, every blister he'd earned. The rifle stopped firing. That fool out there had emptied his weapon, even one that held as many bullets as the Winchester 73. He was probably reloading now. Dakota had counted the shots. 13 rounds, the number of bullets in a fully loaded Winchester, one with the longest barrel and the smallest caliber. Dakota crawled on, angling, keeping in mind his assailant's position. He wondered if the fool would decide to move. Probably not. Most likely he thought he had Dakota pinned down. But Dakota knew exactly where the would-be killer was hiding. His breathing slowed as he circled the meadow, closing the distance between them. He needed to leave the meadow, get to higher ground. He headed toward a fall of rocks that were perfectly placed, also there by the sweat of his brow. He'd used the rocks to conceal himself while he climbed into position. His pulse slowed. His mind focused on something so sharp, so vivid it was nearly painful. Dakota drew from all his years of accumulated knowledge, from his time spent on the wagon train, the miserable year homesteading, the wandering he'd done, and, finally, the decision to find a quiet, safe place near a good friend where he'd start a ranch.